this special meeting of the City Council. First, I want to announce that we are being audio and video recorded. First up is public comment. Now, if you're here for the public hearing, you may want to wait and save your comment until that time when the department heads will be speaking. But if there's anyone who has more general public comment that doesn't pertain to the budget, please come up now. Nope, seeing none. Then, Laura, will you call the roll, please, for the council?
Sure. Councilor O'Donnell, present. Councilor Dwight.
Here.
Councilor Carney.
Present.
Councilor Bidwell.
Here.
Councilor Nash.
Here.
Councilor Shara.
Here.
Councilor Murphy.
Here.
Councilor Labarge.
Present.
And Councilor Klein.
Here.
Okay. So this is the public hearing on the fiscal year 2020 budget. Tonight's public hearing is being held in accordance with the Charter of Northampton, Article 7, Finance and Fiscal Procedures, Section 7-4, Action on the Operating Budget, public hearing. It's also been duly advertised as required by Mass General Law, Chapter 40A. The City Council will consider the proposed FY2020 budget and hear all persons who wish to be heard thereon. The proposed FY2020 budget in Northampton will be available for inspection by the public in the following locations at the specified times. Online at the city website at www.northamptonma.gov, at Forbes Library at 20 West Street in Northampton. The hours are Monday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Wednesday, this is the typo, it should be 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Thursday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And also at Lilly Library at 19 Meadow Street in Florence. Those hours are Monday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., Wednesday, they are closed, Thursday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., Saturday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And the budget is also available in the city clerk's office in City Hall at 210 Main Street, and the hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. Before I open up the public hearing, just a couple of comments. Some of you are here to likely discuss the school bargaining or other collective bargaining, but this hearing is for this fiscal 2020 budget that's before us, and that specific bargaining for schools has gone to mutually agreed upon mediation, and is also additionally not under our purview. But any bargaining that can't be discussed, the department heads will tell you if they're constrained from discussing that with you. And in terms of our process this evening, we have the 5 department heads of the 5 largest departments in the city. They will present their budgets. After each presentation, the council will comment, and then we will open it up to the public for comment. Please keep your comments to a reasonable length, and try not to make them too repetitious. We have a lot of department heads and a lot of things to get through tonight. And additionally, please direct all comments to the chair, which is me this evening. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to open the public hearing.
Make a motion.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of opening the public hearing?
Aye.
Any objections? Abstentions? Okay, the public hearing is now open. So I'd like to ask up our first department head, which is Dr. John Provost, the superintendent of the Northampton Public Schools.
Thank you. According to our usual process, the ALT team began work on the FY20 budget in December of 2018. This February, I brought forth our recommended budget, which emphasized 6 broad areas of district improvement. The 6 focus areas included bringing effective practices from the elementary schools to the secondary level, supporting innovation so that our schools could be more adaptable to student interests and workforce demands, adding support services to meet the needs of a changing population, enhancing math and arts education, providing adequate administrative support, and addressing some quality of experience factors for students, faculty, and staff. Based upon feedback from the committee, I fleshed out those budget concepts into a fully developed budget, which was proposed in March. The only significant change that the committee asked for at that time was that I stretch a little further on my proposal to increase the rates for hourly and daily subs. In March, I came back to the committee with a $30,743,780 budget request. That request included all district improvement focus areas and reflected an adjusted increase in hourly subs, going from $11 to $13 an hour instead of the original $11 to $12 that was proposed in February. I had reserved, in addition to budgeting for the district improvement areas, and making the adjustments for hourly subs, we had reserved funds in that budget for wage increases that were expected due to collective bargaining. This was a $1,039,645 increase from FY19, a 3.5% increase. The budget vote was postponed in April, and so it was postponed in March to the April school committee meeting. At that meeting, I presented $203,000 of cuts to our proposed district improvement efforts, and the committee added an additional reduction of software line of about $11,000. It then approved the original request in the amount of $30,743,780. The reductions made from the budget were not used to reduce the bottom line, but to go into the reserve for wage increases. After that, the mayor agreed to increase the budget by an additional $300,137. This also went to the reserve for wage increases. So I offer this chronology just to explain that some of the items included in the FY20 school budget, as posted on the website, have already been eliminated, and that the amount I request from you is not the $30,743,780 approved by the school committee, but $31,043,917, which includes the additional funds promised by the mayor after the budget was passed. So with that background, I'm happy to answer any questions councilors may have about the budget request.
Thank you. Councilors.
Just a clarification, could you please just say that number again? The new
The
number?
request,
Yes.
$31,043,917.
Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I have a question because citywide, we went and did a compensation and classification study. Have you done that in your department?
So I can answer part of the question, and part of it I have to defer on because it's part of collective bargaining. We've done that for non-represented employees, and so that part I can speak about. And the other part is confidential.
Okay.
Councilors? Councilor Dwight.
Doctor, I don't need to tell you that, of course, there's been a lot of emotions associated with the discussions and the constraints that the push me pull you constraints of budget season plus the need to try and achieve decent salaries and decent accommodations, but principally with the primary objective being what is best for the end user, the student. And I think what's been lost in a lot of the conversation, of course, has been the constraints. I understand that some of, and by the way, there will be a question mark at the end of this eventually, but I think this is about my 5th or 6th season of these kind of conversations, and I understand the emotions that come into play. And the frustrations as they manifest in these conversations is very localized without the consideration of the greater consideration of the external influences that actually affect our bottom line. And so, you know, I often equate it with akin to pulling up to a gas pump, seeing these ridiculous gas prices, and then spending an hour and a half yelling at my gas pump. At which point, in fact, actually gas pump has no agency in this, and the gas pump really isn't going to give me a satisfactory answer. And at some level, I feel like that gas pump. And I know that you do as well, the mayor does as well, the school committee does as well, and the frustration, we are the sounding board, the receiving board for all the legitimate complaints. And so here comes the question mark. I mean, I'm presuming, and I think I know because I've heard you say so, but I'm presuming that you also share the same concern relative to pay parity or pay equivalency across the state. I'm sure, I would imagine that your best aspiration is to have the most amount of money available to the personnel that you want to honor for their work. So that, am I wrong in that, or there's that question mark?
No, you're not wrong in that. But as you mentioned, this all takes place in the context of much larger forces. Right? One of the things that I looked at just before coming upstairs was the cherry sheets to see if there had been any differences. As far as I can tell, Northampton is actually still scheduled to get a decrease in state aid for education from last year. So I'm asking for a $1.3 million increase while the city is getting a $200,000 decrease in aid from the state. And I do that on behalf of the students and the staff who work for the district. I do it knowing that Northampton values education, but I do it humbly knowing that you're being cut on one end while I'm advocating for more funds on the other end. And the only body that can make up that difference right now is the city.
We also are a state that, for reasons that defy understanding from me, but we're a state that decided that rather than do progressive taxation in the state and gather revenue progressively, we've reverted to regressive systems more and more and expansively, and putting the greater onus on the communities and their property values, which, as you know, has very little to do with someone's actual income. It's just how their asset is valued. And as such, we are funding schools. We are required to offset unfunded mandates through taxation, taxing properties in Northampton. And I think as an example, we can see, for instance, South Hadley just made a headline today that South Hadley is facing $1 million cut. And in the process, we're in this community, the mayor has actually laid out a long-term plan for this when he first got elected, and it's gone ongoing about how we will continue to fund. We're sure to run up against the fact that we are not going to be able to fund, and that we at some point are going to have to appeal for an override. I've invoked that word, and the lights didn't flicker, so I'll move forward. The South Hadley probably is going to function differently. They're not going to move for an override to offset these things. So I believe they are now facing $1 million in cuts. What would $1 million in cuts look like for us?
Well, going to the $200,000 of cuts, that was a director of equity, 504 coordinator, a math teacher at the high school, an ESL teacher at Bridge Street. Something we wanted to do to provide bathroom equity for our female students, but now won't be able to do. Air conditioning that we wanted to put in the schools to make the schools better for staff and students during the hot days, and also some efficiencies we wanted to get through the MUNA system by hiring a consultant. So that's 1/5. So take that list and multiply it by 5, and that's what $1 million looks like.
Is that staffing cuts that go even deeper into actual teachers?
The two main pieces of our workforce are ESPs and teachers. it would have to come from that area. Our administrative staff is already basically decimated. We've got no associate principals at the elementary schools. There's very little support in central office. So I believe that's where the cuts would have to go. I don't feel like we're able to maintain the buildings by reducing custodians sufficiently. I don't feel like we have room to make much in the way of cuts in the clerical units. So I would imagine if I had $1 million problem, it would land mainly on teachers and ESPs.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly ask for clarification? So the cherry sheet you're referring to, is that the proposed Senate budget that has,
Yes.
which they're pleased has more education funding, but you're saying that still would result in how big a cut for Northampton?
So this is what I have it in 19 on the receipts. I've got $10,137,367, and then in charges, $3,127,322. So the difference there is just over $7 million. For 20, I've got $10,060,528 in receipts and $3,257,215 in charges. The difference there is $6.8 million. So that's a reduction by my math.
I saw hands. Councilor Klein.
Thank you for the presentation. I have one pretty simple mathematical question and then more of a process question. The first question is just about the variance in the different elementary schools, their different budgets, and it's not a huge difference from elementary school to elementary school, but I'm wondering if you could just briefly speak to what those differences account for. And then the kind of slightly more complex question is process in terms of how do you actually determine the budget? What is the school department's process in terms of gathering information from all levels within the school? So, not just your finance administrator, not just the principals, but the line staff and everybody that is part of the school personnel. How are they brought into that process, if at all? And I'm not asking you to go into collective bargaining or any of that. I'm talking about the budgetary process and formulating the budget for the schools.
So to answer the first question first, there are two drivers of the differences among the elementary schools. The primary one is size. In two of our schools, we're essentially two classes per grade level, and in two of our schools, we're essentially 3 classes per grade level. So you have 6 additional teachers in the larger schools, and that's the main driver. The other piece that drives it somewhat is the variance in wages from the top to bottom of our scale. It's about 100% difference between the lowest paid teacher and the highest paid teacher. So depending on where they are on that scale, that will cause differences also. Now speaking to the process, as I said, the budget process begins with our team in December. That's when I gather from principals their budget requests that come to them from department chairs and heads and their conversations with teachers. We work on the budget until February, which is the unveiling of what I call the first view budget. It's not a fully formed budget, but it basically indicates the directions we think we'd like to head as a district and begins at least month-long, sometimes a little bit more than a month-long public comment period. During that public comment, we have a joint meeting of all of the school councils. School councils are made of parents and faculty from each of the schools. They all come together and provide feedback on the budget. And then we have feedback from staff and members of the public. Typically, I'd say we get anywhere between 50 and 100 comments on budget proposals, and typically we make pretty significant changes based on the feedback. You heard me describe the changes that we made this year based on feedback. When we were moving to the inclusion model in the elementary schools. We actually created 3 whole budgets that year with 3 different scenarios based on feedback we had received during that public comment process. So that's what it looks like.
So a follow-up question. Can you share from that part of the process, and again, not from the collective bargaining piece, what you heard as the priorities from personnel in the schools?
More money in wages. That was clearly the priority. That's why the alt team came up with $200,000 worth of cuts, but said to the school committee, we're cutting the budget, but please don't cut the bottom line, leave the money in there. That was for wage increases.
And from parents, and you said from the school councils, what did you hear?
Well, the school councils were very supportive of the original proposal. They really had no real changes that they wanted to make. I would say the one thing that they expressed as somewhat of a dissatisfaction was there wasn't additional program support or funding for more community engagement, more parent outreach, more evening activities with faculty, but that just wasn't able to rise high enough, even with that feedback, for us to feel like it needed to be included in the budget.
Councilor Labarge, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Question. I have received a tremendous amount of calls, and my ward is between conservative and the question of a Prop 2.5, which we're hearing, and I'm not going to go a little further with that until the time comes. But why is it that every time that we're short of money, excuse me, in the school department, the threats come where we're laying off teachers? We hear this all the time, and it's just not me. It's many people saying that. And if you look at your budget and you say you're short of clerical, I don't see too much of a shortage of clerical. I'm hearing from people also about assistants to the directors throughout the city. So there's problems here. And I'm just hoping we all can work together, come to a good compromise. But once we're going to go ahead and approve a budget, I am hoping somehow you as a superintendent, you're going to have time here to do some thinking, along with our mayor too, who has worked very tirelessly to give out the 300 and something thousand out of our budget to help the school department, that you also put some time into it and see what you can find in this budget, so we don't have to lay off any teachers, but look at other areas. That's all I have to say. Don't touch custodians, because that happened once before, and our buildings became in a very bad way. So whatever you can do to work with us and help us, because I respect the teachers, and having my children at Ryan Road School, leaving that school, going through high school, going through college, they became what they are today. And if it wasn't for our teachers, where would they be? I have respect for them, and I am hoping as a city that all of us can work together, do a good compromise, and I think with what they're asking for is pretty good. And I'm hoping we can do this and do a compromise so everybody can work together in this city. That's what I'm asking.
Thank you.
Anybody? Councilor Nash?
Dr. Provost, can you clarify, so there was a savings of $750,000, I believe it was, roughly, that had to do with money coming back in district, I think, because we actually were able to educate special ed students in district. Could you explain that a little bit, how that all worked out? Because I think there was some confusion about that.
So we had $726,000 of special education funds that became available because of students who were formerly placed out of district who were returning to the district. And it's typically much more economical to educate a child within the district. Tuitions for our district placements go anywhere from $50,000 for a day placement to $250,000 for residential placement. So it doesn't take a lot of students to make that kind of a difference in the budget. Of that, we had $127,000 that were already used within the context of those student changes in placement. Oftentimes when you bring a student back from a district placement, you need to add ESPs to the budget, or you need to add teaching services to the budget. So that was reduced from that amount. We also had a circuit breaker increase. I should say, not all, I'm sorry, and we also had a circuit breaker increase this year because in the prior year, we had been paying a penalty for claiming too much on circuit breaker the year before that. So this year, we have an additional $250,000 in circuit breaker money, which is available for the budget. Additionally, there were reductions within this budget, even though there were increases. There were 2 ESP positions that were reduced, and that added to the amount of funding that we had available for the other priorities that we tried to fund. So the one thing about this that's tricky came to when we were coming up with our cut list, because in order to maintain your eligibility for federal special education funding, you have to demonstrate maintenance of effort, which means essentially that you can't reduce the budget on the backs of special ed students. Some of that money that was saved from special ed had to be used, had to still be spent in special ed purposes. So we had identified $417,000 worth of positions that contributed to the maintenance of effort. We said those need to be included in the budget. And then we made cuts from items that weren't contributing to the maintenance of effort. We did also recommend keeping some things that didn't add to maintenance of effort, but we just felt were really important for the district. It is a complicated story. Is that helpful?
Well, so we can't just cut 750 from the budget, otherwise we're losing our qualification for federal funds. And so we have to have this maintenance of effort. And what's the number you came up with for that you felt comfortable for maintenance of effort?
We needed $408,000 for maintenance of effort.
Okay.
Just to clarify on the last point, you could cut $700,000 from general ed. You can cut any amount you want from general ed, but you have to maintain effort in special ed.
Okay. And then there's some other positions here that I'm wondering if they're covered under this maintenance of effort. There's a transition coordinator, a tech pathway coordinator, Twilight Academy. Am I correct in that?
So let me just go through those.
Yeah, please do, because I'm interested in hearing about those programs.
So these are the positions that contribute to maintenance of effort. A academic and behavior support teacher for Bridge Street School, academic and behavior support teacher for Leeds, a half-time academic and support teacher for Ryan Road School. Those are all part of a response intervention program. One of the things you can use your federal special education funds for is early intervening services to try to timely identify students and also prevent students from developing learning problems that require extensive remediation. So all of those counted towards the maintenance of effort. A board certified behavior analyst for Jackson Street School. It's actually a .67 position. 2 math interventionists for JFK. Again, that's an RTI model. A post-graduation transition coordinator for the high school. You said you had a question about that, so let me just stop there and talk about that. We are having, as our population starts to express some more extreme needs, having a number of students educated in the high school who require services until they're 22. From my perspective, having 19, 20, 21-year-old students in the high school is not an inclusive setting. All of their peers are in the community or in college. So programming for them and inclusion for them really means job site, community-based learning, but you need someone to do that. And so this position would be for that, because they're all students who qualify for special ed. That's why this counts towards maintenance of effort. A special ed teacher for JFK, pretty obvious why that qualifies. Clerk services for clerk for student services, because it's in the special ed department. And Twilight Academy. Twilight Academy is a program that we're hoping to run next year for students who've dropped out and been re-engaged. Because the good news is that we've been able to re-engage almost 80% of students who drop out from high school. The bad news is almost 100% of them drop out again. So what we're learning is just placing them back in the same learning experience that they were in before is not likely to lead to a different kind of an outcome. So the idea of Twilight Academy is it's a program that will run after school. It's a program that will be available on an a la carte basis, because some students are only missing one class for graduation, some kids are only missing 2 classes for graduation. We think it will be helpful for the students to not have to be with their peers, because much like the 18 to 22-year-old population, there's a certain amount of stigma that goes with watching all of your peers graduate and you're still there. So that's the concept for Twilight Academy. And again, not all, but the predominant majority of those kids are students with disabilities. That's why that position will qualify.
I just want to comment and say that as somebody who works with youth, I think this is all really tremendous stuff that you're doing. I mean, the Twilight Academy, re-engaging with those youth, sometimes it's just a class or two, and pulling together the credits so they can graduate. Having somebody to work on transitions, that's tremendous. That I'm really glad that Northampton Schools is stepping forward to do that. The various supports that are going on in all of the schools, that those are coming back into all of the various schools around town. And when students' needs are being addressed, that the other staff have time to focus on what they need to focus on. So, bravo.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet? Councilor Goodwin, no.
Thank you very much, Dr. Provost. As you know, this council has joined with you and the school committee in having reservations, to put it mildly, about the charter school funding situation and the inequities in the funding formula and the extremely detrimental fiscal impact that has on our own schools. I have one very specific question and then a more general question. The reimbursement that we get from the state, flawed as the formula is and unfunded as it is, even so it's projected to go down quite dramatically at the same time that our charter school sending tuition continues to go up. So I wondered if you could explain why in the current budget year, $313,000 of projected reimbursement is projected to go down to $183,000. And then I'd have a more general question.
I can't give a detailed answer to that, but I can say it has to do with the difference from going from a 5-year reimbursement formula to a 3-year reimbursement formula. Is one thing. The other thing is charter school reimbursement is based on the idea that you'll always send more students than you sent the year before, because the reimbursement is on the difference in the between year to year. So if you have a steady state or if you have a declining charter population, your reimbursement gets cut.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
The theory is that you've had time to take that into your budget, you've been able to make your layoffs, and you don't need any help anymore.
That's the theory, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. The larger question is that we all would like to see dramatic changes in this funding situation, and over time, hopefully with help from the legislature, that will happen. But in the meantime, what do you hear are the primary reasons that we lose students to charters, and what is the committee's and your own strategy for addressing that and keeping some of those that we otherwise lose?
We did do a survey of charter school parents a couple of years ago. The main reason cited by parents leaving for charters was to have a sense of smaller community, which is one of the things that charter schools are set up to do. I really don't have a good response to that. Because there are certain reasons why districts operate at the scale that they do. There are benefits of size just as well as there are benefits of small communities. For example, having a vibrant arts program, having a, engaging athletic program requires a certain critical mass of students. And if you break up into a number of small high schools, like some charters are, some of them have one sport per season. I guess there are pluses and minuses, and I think that there are things we can do to create, community within schools. I think we have a strong sense of community within our schools. I think that one of the things we also found from the survey is many of the parents who were in charter schools had never been enrolled in a Northampton public school. So I think, for the most part, if they try it, they might like it.
Okay.
Yes. Another thing that bothers me, I do have some residents who have taken their son or their daughter out of Ryan Road School in regards to doing in-home teaching, and are doing very, very well with that because of the problem with the child, and classrooms are large, but they have no choice to do that versus going to a charter school, and they're very happy they made that move. So we've got problems, there's no question about it. But I'm just wondering about your rainy day fund that you have. What are you using that for?
We're using that for the shortfall in the budget. This year, we're tapping about $1 million of it in order to balance our budget. Next year, we'll be tapping much of the rest of it, and then I think in the year after that, we're projected to run out. You're welcome.
Other questions?
As a point of clarification, though, someone who homeschools is not, it's not equivalent to a loss that we would experience with a charter school student. Or if someone sent their child to a private school, the same thing.
That's correct.
So our chapter 70 money is projected to be less in the coming year. And the charter sending tuition will be higher. Now that charter sending tuition comes straight off the top of chapter 70, is that right?
Our chapter 70 actually is going up slightly.
Okay.
But it's, when I talked about total school receipts, that was chapter 70, the charter school tuition reimbursement, and the school choice receiving tuition. So it's the combination of all of those that's down slightly. And that answers the question. That money comes right off the top and is reflected in
So
that number.
that's how we end up with that reduction. Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the council? Seeing none, I'm going to open it up to the public. So if you could come and state your name and your city, and share your comment, please. Raise your, this is, so just to be clear, this is just to Dr. Provost's presentation. Okay. Anyone?
My name is Andrea Agito. I am the teacher chapter coordinator for the Northampton Association of School Employees. And as you all know, I've been paying really close attention to this process, so I appreciate all of your patience with me and my learning curve. I did have a question and then a couple of comments that I'd like to make to Superintendent Provost's budget. My first question is, if taxpayers paid for a study about compensation, why would those results be required to be confidential? I know that the city released the results of the study that was done for city employees, so I guess I'm unsure, and I know that other city unions were bargaining at the same time, but yet that report was still released. So I'm confused as to why the report about our school employees isn't being released or is being claimed to be confidential if the city released their study that was done by I'm pretty sure it was UMass that did that study. So that was my question that I hope someone can answer. And then my comment is that the cuts that the superintendent referred to that he made for this past budget are things, I just want to be clear, are things that never existed. So Councilor Dwight, when you asked about, what cuts would have to be made, these were cuts of basically figurative positions. They weren't things that were actually in the schools and being cut. They never existed and had been added. And I just want to point out that our district has been adding fluff into the budget for at least 5 years. As this committee, or this council, and the mayor has raised the school budget by around 3% each year. The largest cost to the school district is the employees, the staff, the people, right? That's what costs the most. But during that time, we have never seen the same increase that the city gave to the school department. We have never gotten that increase in the wages for those people. The increases were spent to add things to the district, which in many cases those things added were lovely, but it still was on the backs of our employees because they never saw a 3% increase. And at the same time, it was only with the public outrage that occurred around this year's budget that those additional things that were being added were then figuratively cut, even though they hadn't actually been added. So, and then I just want to make one other point in the budget, because none of us as employees want the school budget to have to make cuts. So when you ask, Superintendent, how would you make $1 million in cuts? Nobody ever wants to see that happen, and no one in NACE is saying we want to see cuts to our schools. We give our blood, sweat, and tears to our schools every day, and we don't want to see those cuts. And what we have seen in the budget is between the city's fiscal stability fund and the school's rainy day fund, there is money to pay the small amount that we are the distance between in collective bargaining currently, which is about a little under $300,000 by my calculations, and I'm not a mathematician, and no one on the school department side was willing to give me those numbers, but it is about $280,000 that we're off. NACE offered an over $800,000 give back in sick day retirement benefits. We offered to take that out of our contract and give it back to the school committee because we don't want those cuts to happen. So when we're talking about, can we give a fair wage to our employees, the money is there, and we're even giving back a lot of it. And yet our school committee and our city are still saying, oh, the money's not there. So that's my question, and I do implore all of you to find out and to release the results of that study for compensation that was done that none of us have ever seen or heard of. So thank you, Councilor Barge, for bringing that up. And I think if the taxpayers paid for it, it behooves all of us to release that information. There's no reason it should be confidential. Thank you.
Thank you. Would someone else like to speak? And
Could the superintendent respond? I don't know.
it's up to you whether you want
Just-
to wait till everyone's spoken and then
Okay, sure.
respond, or if you want to respond after each comment. It's totally up to you, however you prefer.
Just as a point of clarification on the study, I said it was confidential from this body. It's not confidential from NACE. You've already seen it. which is, I don't want to get into negotiations here.
That was my second point. I was just going to remind everyone that we're not talking about this current bargaining, which I know is frustrating, but we are here to talk about this budget. So if you can keep your comments to this budget, we would appreciate it. Someone else like to speak to?
I'm Sam Hopper. I live here in Northampton, and I'm wearing my parent hat, just to be clear. I was actually really thrilled that we're getting additional tiered support at Bridge Street next year. My daughter is in a cohort that is going to be leading the K-2 supports, and her cohort needs a lot of supports. And in fact, last year, I spoke with several teachers, her teachers and other teachers at her school, and they wanted more supports. One other thing that came out of the all school councils meeting this year is that they need more supports at the middle school level and the high school level. So I just, want to clarify that cuts have been made already. We don't have librarians, we don't have administrative support. So I just want to kind of clarify that several cuts have been made, and in discussions with student services and parents and teachers, we don't have all of the supports we need. So I'm glad that we're getting some this year, but I hope that it doesn't get forgotten in future budgets.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on the school budget? No? Okay.
Well, I just want to say, it's not as specific
Please step
about.
up and state your
I
name.
will. Jenny Fleming Ives, Ward 2B. I am a former parent of 4 daughters who went through the Northampton High School public schools, currently a grandparent of a grandson in Bridge Street. I just want you to be visionary about the teachers and the schools. Our schools should be the jewel in the crown of this city. And I don't feel, I've been here 30 years standing, talking about school budgets. And I don't think that we really show our teachers how we value them by the compensation we give them. So I'm just pleading with you to be visionary about your decisions around the budget.
Thank you, Jenny. Just to clarify, we can only do an up-down vote on the budget and cut. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Borges, for coming. We will move on to the next department head that we have scheduled, which is the DPW Director, Donald Scalia.
Good evening, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak to the Public Works budget. Tonight I'm going to speak about each Public Works division and its responsibilities, as well as reorganization within the DPW as a whole that's relevant to this budget conversation. With more than 120 employees and large-scale responsibilities for valuable infrastructure, it's not enough to just run DPW operations. They need to be constantly refined. So in that vein, we recognize the need for restructuring within the department. Over the past year, we've undertaken multiple initiatives to increase efficiency and enhance services. We've consolidated our engineering staff from their location at Prospect Street to Locust Street. We've consolidated water operations staff for the treatment plant, and most notably, we have consolidated forestry operations to join parks and cemetery staff at Spring Grove Cemetery. Historically, the highway division at DPW was one division, with a highway superintendent overseeing streets, fleet maintenance, parks, forestry, cemeteries, sewer collection, stormwater, and solid waste operations. This diffuse operation required oversight of more than 50 employees with massive responsibilities around logistics, maintenance, and operations of the individual divisions. So the restructuring within the DPW that we have undertaken has accomplished several goals. All the engineers now work together in one location at Locust Street. All the water department staff now work together at one location at the plant. Building on Prospect Street can be surplus or repurposed. All forestry, parks, and cemetery staff are now consolidated in one location at Spring Grove Cemetery with a new forestry, parks, and cemetery superintendent. And most notably, the highway operation has been contained to a more manageable level where we have a superintendent who can focus on the specific responsibilities of the highway division. I thank the mayor and his staff for their support while we undertook this reorganization. So that is the backdrop for the 2020 budget from DPW that you see in front of you. So the DPW general fund in 2020 is broken into 4 divisions. There's administration and engineering, snow and ice, highway fleet maintenance, and forestry, parks, and cemetery. Within these 4 divisions, we maintain 150 plus miles of paved and unpaved roads, 85 miles of sidewalks, 38 bridges, 30 plus signal controlled intersections. We're fortunate to have a level 3 signal technician on staff, which saves considerable contractor expense. We have more than 150 vehicles and pieces of specialized equipment, everything from street sweepers to sidearm mower, dump truck, grader. We have more than 10,000 public shade trees, 225 plus acres of athletic fields and parks, 4 cemeteries, all of which are active burial grounds, and over 20,000 monuments, 11 plus miles of bike paths. So to start with administration and engineering, if you look at the budget, no significant changes year over year. This captures the engineering and clerical support for the department's operations, including the city engineer who creates, reviews, and stamps plans used to bid capital projects, including the millions of dollars in paving that is currently occurring throughout the city. We also have a dedicated traffic engineer to support transportation improvements. Modest OM budget within this division is used to maintain the building at 125 Locust Street. Skipping ahead to the snow and ice budget, this captures the required overtime for plowing, contractor assistance if we need it, and the salt used to treat the city's roadways. We used about 2,000 tons of salt last year, and we have about that amount on hand at any one time. So then we have to look at the highway division and forestry, parks, and cemetery separately and then together. So I just discussed the reorganization that we've done. What you see in the highway division are decreases in PS as well as personnel count, and you see a decrease in OM. The decreases are because salaries, employees, and some operational responsibilities have shifted to forestry, parks, and cemeteries. So there'll be an increase in those lines in forestry, parks, and cemeteries. And a few further words about the forestry, park, and cemetery division. They are responsible for some of the things I just noted, maintenance of fields and parks and facilities to support, but what are they actually supporting? 2,400 participants in organized sports, 128 organized teams, like sports teams, 2,500 beachgoers at Busanti Beach. We are a 7-day-a-week operation, April through November, to support these city initiatives. And just to give you an idea, Florence Field alone is 24 acres. That's an awful lot of mowing and fertilizing and practice. I'll also say a couple words about the city's tree program. The city planted 297 trees in 2018 and 857 since 2016. We've received the Tree City USA Award 12 years running and 3 growth awards from the Arbor Day Foundation. And there's also many volunteers who are critical to our operation. So the net change in personnel when looking at highways and forestry, parks, and cemetery together is the addition of 2 full-time positions. One is for the superintendent of the new forestry division, and one is a foreman for our dedicated tree crew. Moving away from the general fund to the enterprise funds, in the water division, we're responsible for operating and maintaining 150 miles of water main, 5,000 valves, 1,400 hydrants, 3 reservoirs and dams for our drinking water, 2 wells for our drinking water, a water treatment plant, and 3,900 acres of watershed land. I previously noted the consolidation of operations at the treatment plant, and that savings is reflected in this budget. When I presented utility rates in March, I mentioned that more than $2 million is dedicated to debt service within this enterprise for the construction of the plant, which was built in 2006. This debt service does not fall off the schedule until 2028. We need to be mindful of this as we build future budgets. And with that in mind, in order to build capacity within the enterprise, we have transferred nearly $800,000 to stabilization in this year's budget for use for capital projects or debt capacity. Moving to the sewer enterprise, we operate and maintain 5,000 sewer and drain manholes, 110 miles of sewer lines. We treat about 4.5 million gallons per day of sewage at our wastewater treatment plant on Hockenham Road. The OOM you will see in the enterprise, cash used for capital projects, has decreased as we anticipate $15 million in wastewater treatment plant upgrades to be funded through an NSRF loan, and I believe that order is before you to approve. Other expenses have increased due to a year-over-year increase in the amount transferred to stabilization for capital projects within the budget as other expenses. And we are transferring a significant amount of money into stabilization as we plan not just for the $58 million in upgrades that we're about to undertake, but for future upgrades in the coming years. Moving to the solid waste division, we operate 2 transfer stations and a capped landfill, provide oversight of the third-party operation of the 3.17 megawatt solar array and a gas to energy facility. One item of note, we now have a full-time waste reduction coordinator who, among other things, oversees the operation of the reuse center at Glendale Road and organizes events such as hazardous waste collection day, repair workshops, and community and reuse and recycling initiatives. A little appreciable year-over-year difference here. And finally, the stormwater utility. Stormwater utility is at $2 million, and through it, we operate and maintain 120 miles of drain pipes, 5,000 catch basins, 350 outfalls, 150 culverts, 6 miles of channels and ditches, and a flood control station and 2 levee systems. Our operations are very strictly governed by our MS4 permit for stormwater collection, and the Army Corps governs our flood control system maintenance, and there's little appreciable year-over-year difference. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to our budget.
Thank you. It's always, I think, good to hear it all laid out like that, and it gives you a real sense of the scope of it, which is gigantic, so thank you. Councilman Buck.
Thank you. Donna, thank you for this presentation. And I know exactly, as a director, how great you have been doing with the Department of Public Works. Again, this year, I have some concerns, which are the vacancies again. Are these vacancies filled since this budget?
A lot has changed since this budget was published. So many of these vacancies have been filled.
Okay, I'm asking you, the Highway Division, please, you have 4 vacancies.
Yes, I've filled 2.
You filled 2, so we still have 2 left, correct?
Correct. Yes, we currently have a mechanic position vacant and an equipment operator position vacant.
Okay, equipment repair, right?
Correct, that's fleet maintenance, yes.
So you need 2 of them?
No, I only need 1. We filled 1 since
You
this
filled
budget
one.
was published.
So you have 1 left?
Yes,
Do you need that one?
we do.
Oh. Okay, thank you. That answered my question on that one. Now, forestry, parks, and cemeteries, you have how many employees with forestry, parks, and cemeteries? I think you have a total of what, 14 positions?
And there's 15 total positions,
15?
16 total positions.
And you have 2 vacancies still, or not?
I have 1 vacancy right now.
That's it on that one? Okay, I'll leave you alone on that one. Water enterprise, you have what, 34 positions?
We have 23 positions, and many of these positions are allocated. So, for example, a portion of my time is charged to the water enterprise, a portion of the city engineer's time is charged to the water enterprise.
So they're divided up, right?
Correct.
Okay, we got 1, 2, 4, 5 vacancies.
Correct, those remain.
They're all filled now?
No, they remain vacant.
They still remain?
Yes.
And you need those?
We do, and it's very challenging to fill vacancies within the water division because of the licensing requirements.
Right.
It's almost a full-fledged apprenticeship program at this point where time and grade is required, as well as extensive training.
And the reason why I'm asking this, because I'm getting calls from people of asking me about staffing here in our city department, okay, that we're overloaded with staff, and that's even in the mayor's office, wherever. They're going through the book, okay? So I need to ask you these questions, and if we can take them, we're gonna take them, and maybe we can help whatever we can in the city. All right, so you answered that one. How about the sewer enterprise fund?
So
We
within the
have
sewer,
3 vacancies on that one.
yeah, so within the sewer enterprise, and this can be a little bit misleading, because, for example, you're seeing motor equipment repair. So this is the same
Same,
mechanic position that we saw in highways, we also see in water, that we're now seeing again in
This
sewer.
is what's confusing
So
people.
it can appear that we actually have more vacancies than we really do.
Exactly. That's why I'm going through this.
And what folks can do is they can look in the column that says FTE, and that shows you, is this actually a whole employee, or is this a portion
Yeah,
of
right.
an employee that is being allocated across multiple divisions?
Wouldn't it be easier if we just labeled it? Whoever it is, right? They work so many hours in one department and whatever. Because people are questioning all this.
I can understand how someone who might
Exactly.
be unfamiliar with the department's operations.
But
might
I
question that.
appreciate this very, very much. And I also want to thank you for everything that you do in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Councilor Dwight?
Donna, first of all, I appreciate that you're ailing. I'm really impressed the fact that you're able to do this. I'm not going to prolong it anymore, but first of all, the consolidation is brilliant. Long needed, and I think one of the things that's worth noting is with that type of consolidation and categorizing, making the silos more distinct in some respect, eliminates redundancies. Actually, I would imagine also improves morale in a lot of respects, and as far as clarity as to responsibilities, duties, and work orders. And apparently it also results in savings. Who knew? Okay, so, but then in that respect, is there you would be the holistic surveyor of all these enterprises, right? I would assume. So we're dependent on your vision, which you clearly laid out, which actually also is very helpful, because I mean, I think, one of the problems when you do have very distinct departments is the potential for isolation between those departments when overlap would be necessary. I mean, and as you said, there is overlap, and it seems that you've orchestrated it very well. So, yeah, it's a long way of saying thank you, good job. The other thing that I heard you note, that you stated rather quickly, relative to the water department, the surplusing, the possible surplusing of the building on Prospect Street. Or is it that, are you suggesting that it's available for surplus and to possibly put back on the tax roll?
I'll defer to the mayor.
Yeah, I'll talk to you on that. So that we are trying to consolidate operations, and we are, you may recall that we're building a storage facility at the water treatment plant. That's one of the capital plan items. And so we are looking at potentially surplusing that building down the road as not needing it for city use. And obviously when we reach that point, I would bring that forward to the city council to go through the formal surplus process.
Maybe, but currently it's essentially vacant.
There's equipment storage.
There's equipment storage in the back,
Yeah,
in the
there's
yard, but in the building and of
Now,
itself.
inside the building,
Inside-
there's
oh, okay.
also meters stored and equipment that
Yeah.
can't be out in the weather
Yeah.
as we wait for construction of the
Yeah, we've
building.
gotten inquiries about it. People have asked us about it. There's
What was
interested
the
parties in
idea?
it.
No.
But at this point, we need to make sure that we get the storage facility built so we can get all the equipment stored there, so.
Good enough. Yeah.
And then again, those funds would be used, under Mass General Law, those would be used to put back into capital
Right.
for supporting water operations.
Well, principally, yeah, on
Because it
the
is a
sale,
water
on the sale
department.
value, but principally the potential of putting something of property on the tax roll and
Potentially. yeah.
potentially.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilor Bidwell?
I won't prolong your stay here, but I will add to the positive feedback. I hear wonderful things about the morale and the pride and professionalism in all parts of DPW's operations, so I commend you and your leadership for that. And I also, no one is ever happy about the roads and road repair. pothole repair, but I have two real, let me just say grouches, who I am always hearing complaints from. I hear from many more than that, but the two in particular who have grudgingly acknowledged timely response to some drainage issues, and a very professional response as well. So I think even some tough critics out there are grudgingly acknowledging that there's a level of responsiveness from the highway division that's much appreciated. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Councilor Carney.
Hello, Director. I have a couple of questions. So I know that the city electrician is paid out of the, looks like the sewer enterprise and also the wastewater. Is that right? Is it just those two funds? Because I was looking for where else.
He's paid out of the water and sewer enterprise because he provides support for electrical operations at the plants primarily.
Right. But are those the two sole sources from the wastewater and the water enterprise?
It's a portion of his salary. I can't speak to
And is the
of
rest
it.
from city services? Is that, I'm sorry, from central services?
It's, the city electrician is paid out of multiple accounts. The schools contribute because he
Oh,
doesn't
that's
ever
right.
work.
Okay.
And he's doing work at the schools as well. So it's divided between the schools and the DPW enterprise funds.
Okay.
And then the city.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Nash.
Director. So I feel compelled to ask, out of the, I'm looking at the expenditures sheet here, and DPW, or Public Works, has a 13, almost 14% increase in its expenditures for the year.
For 2020?
Yeah, for 2020. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that. Because I as we were going across the different divisions that you oversee, I wasn't quite sure where the 14% happened.
The 14% is a result of the consolidation of forestry, parks, and cemetery and highways as separate. So what we did, part of that 14% is the adding of two positions, and they are high-level positions, a superintendent overseeing each division now, as well as a foreman for our dedicated tree crew. And then there's a certain amount of moving of resources between highways and forestry, parks, and cemetery in order to more accurately reflect the needs of each individual division. So that's where you're seeing that increase.
Thank you. All right, and I just want to add, I love working with you as the chair of the TPC, and I think we've had a very productive relationship and gotten good things done for the city. So
Thank you, Councilor.
I also want to say thank you. I also have consistently extremely positive experiences with working with you, working with your staff, and find you to be very responsive and clear, come up with the information that people need very quickly, and it usually helps me to serve my constituents the best way that I can, so I'm very appreciative. And thank you for this kind of, as Councilor Shara said, this incredible, the breadth of what you do is always astounding to me in the DPW. I just have some questions. I want to understand more. I think the consolidation is brilliant. It's efficient. As someone who creates budgets, I'm just curious about how snow and ice is its own division when it doesn't look, it looks very different than every other one of the new divisions. It doesn't have named personnel. Over time, it's almost like, no pun intended, it seems like a slush fund, you know? Because it doesn't, who are we talking about? Are these employees that are from all the different departments that are doing this overtime to do the snow and ice clearing? And why was it made, why is it a separate division? Why isn't it under highways, which seems to make the most sense kind of instinctively?
I can answer one of your questions, and I'll defer to Susan for the structure of
The
it.
reason that snow and ice is tracked separately and you don't see personnel assigned to it is we have to isolate just our expense to clear the roads for snow and ice. It's the only thing we are lawfully allowed to deficit spend, and that's why it is its own division, because you have to track those expenses separately. But she's using staff from all of the various divisions to actually carry out the snow and ice. And if you look, the snow and ice is just the labor that's spent on clearing roads, and then the salt and the sand, that kind of thing. But
So
we
it's
have
all-
to track those
sorry.
separately because of the way Mass General Laws allows us to deficit spend because of the nature of snow and ice.
So I'm curious about the nature of the overtime too, because that seems to imply, I would imagine it implies that we're paying time and a half or whatever the overtime wages are. If these are people that are coming from these other departments and they're not doing their regular duties because it's the winter, what are they doing so that the overtime, it becomes overtime when they're actually clearing the roads? I'm just thinking about, you know, where there could be potential savings.
Yeah, I can speak to the operations a little bit. So the overtime is available to employees within the main union, Hampton Association of Municipal Employees. These are the folks who are the equipment operators and the truck drivers. They have commercial driver's licenses and hoisting licenses to operate the equipment that actually clears the roads. We run 3 shifts, November, like right after Thanksgiving to, I would say, April 1st. So those are 3 regular shifts, Monday through Friday. And on the weekend, that is over and above coverage. So that is, you know, weather dependent, and we have to also staff 24 hours a day just because it's Saturday and Sunday. We still have to be staffed. So these are folks who are able to drive our vehicles and operate our equipment, who would be working this overtime. A typical shift, you know, if it's August and you work in the streets division, is 7 to 3, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then we are unstaffed. So if it's snowing before 7 a.m. or after 3 p.m., an employee is in on overtime unless they are the dedicated second or third shift employee within the streets division who is there for their regular shift. So in a typical snowstorm, let's say it was going to snow 6 inches tonight, we have about 65 folks working. We have 150 miles of roadway to clear, as well as the sidewalks we do in the parks and so on. So it's a very large operation that requires round-the-clock work. So the overtime line item is capturing all of these employees' off hours.
And then Jim, one last question is looking at the chart that is the snow and ice appropriations, and I do understand that we can run a deficit around it. Looking consistently between 2004 and 2018, we have under budgeted consistently, and so we're actually pulling money from general funds, is that correct, to make up those deficits?
Right, we actually deliberately do under budget for snow and ice, because the way Mass General Law works is in order to be able to deficit spend in that category, you can never appropriate less than you appropriated the year before. Because year by year it fluctuates so much, we don't want to put in a number, say we average $700,000 a year in snow and ice, we don't want to put 700 in there, because there are years that we actually have spent less. So we have come to the number of 500, we always put in 500, and as long as we put in 500 each year, we can deficit spend. We could never go and put 400 in one year, and because then we would not be allowed to deficit spend should we exceed it. So that's why it's a weird, you know, way the Mass General Law works around the snow and ice deficit. But we always anticipate that we will use probably $100,000 to $300,000 of free cash, and we take that into account as soon as free cash is certified. I already kind of book that as our snow and ice additional money. So that's how we budget.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody? I too have a constituent that I've struggled to please for 5 years and never could possibly make happy. And this year got a glowing email as well about some work that was done on the street by your staff. So, like Councilor Bidwell, I thank you for that. You clearly, everyone's doing extraordinary work to make certain folks happy and everyone happy. So thank you. Appreciate it.
And I really offer my thanks to the men and women of the DPW. They do a fantastic job.
I'm now going to open it up to the public for any comments on the DPW budget. Anybody? You've heard all the things that are covered. No one's got anything to say about it? Okay. In that case, thank you so much, Director Lascalio. Please feel better. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next up, we are going to invite the police chief, Jody Casper.
Good evening. Thank you for having me before you to talk about our FY20 budget. As an update on our general call volume, we continue to be pretty much right around where we always are. We are at 38,700 calls last year. Of those calls, 353 for domestic violence. We had 709 arrests, 536 motor vehicle accidents that were of a serious nature or resulted in serious injuries to the occupant. 83 OUI arrests, 45 overdoses last year, 8 of which resulted in deaths. We continue to have a high amount of overdoses and deaths. It's been unfortunately very busy in that area for us even over the last few weeks. So that's certainly something that we continue to struggle with as a community. In addition to those calls, which I can give you very clear numbers on, the number of calls that we go on that involve people who are in crisis or who have mental health issues are just in the thousands. You know, some of these calls may capture that, but so many of the calls that we go on don't result in a report or an arrest, but they take a lot of time to kind of figure out what's going on with the person and sometimes connect them with services. So we definitely see a large number of calls that involve people who are in crisis. So that's just a quick call overview from last year, directing you specifically to the budget that I presented. Staffing levels are remaining the same. There's no increase in our full-time staffing. You know, we continue to fluctuate between when we have vacancies and when we always have a vacancy, but we continue to fluctuate as people come and go from the department. We do have a high-ranking person, Dorothy Clayton's retiring this year. You may have read that in the paper recently. So that creates a domino effect for us as we move through the building and make additional promotions. So we have some significant leadership changes in the building that are in the middle of taking place right now. So we can't believe we're losing Dorothy, who's been with the city for 36 years of full-time service, and actually years before that. We have some great embarrassing pictures of her when she was even younger as a explorer in 1977, I think. So she'll enjoy those at her retirement reception. So that's our staffing situation. So no change there. In crossing guards, we did add one additional crossing guard this year. A crossing guard was requested in front of Jackson Street School. The principal, Gwen Agner, requested this, identifying a particularly dangerous crossing area. We did go out and check it out. It did appear that way. So we added an additional crossing guard. So you'll see an additional $4,680 on the line for crossing guards. Training overtime also increased slightly to cover the increase in cost of training. Just to give you an example, the ALERT training, which is an acronym for the training that we do for active shooters in the schools, we're supposed to do that annually for all of our employees. That we just did it in April, and it cost the city $18,800 to do this training. It's a 2-day training, and unfortunately, most of that training is on overtime because there's so many people who are involved. That was 28 officers. In most cases in training, officers don't do it on overtime. They're able to move their shifts, but you have to have people, you know, we do it typically when they're on duty, but you can't do that with 28 people. We don't have that many people on duty at one time. So it's a very expensive training, and that's only half of our department, just to give you kind of an idea of our overtime training expenses. Down in the ordinary maintenance section of our budget, there's an increase in police supplies. We looked at the 5-year average over the last 5 years and really just based it on where that number fell. We've had some increases. We know that the The ammunition cost is going to be going up just because the state has required additional, I touched on that before with you folks when we were talking about ammunition more, but the state has changed the rules around firearms training. We don't have a number on that yet, but we know it's going to be more. And then also there's new equipment required for our recruits who are going into the academies and technology, so that's going to be an increased cost. There's a few other odds and ends, but that's just a few samples for you. The next line, the training cost, that's gone up a little bit. Again, we based it on a 5-year look back average. It's right about where it was, with only a slight increase. And finally, under other than ordinary maintenance, that's just one line, you'll see a total of $305,360. That's the cost for our vehicles. The way I do that cost is I look at the cost of the vehicles last year, and I just do a 3% increase on the base price. There's other equipment that goes into the cruisers, so the cameras, the radios, the keyboards, other equipment that we put in the back, medical equipment. So it makes each cruiser valued at about $49,623. That was the FY2019, so then with the increase, it brings each cruiser to about $61,000. This will be the first year that Ford has created a hybrid Ford Explorer. Our fleet, our Ford Explorer vehicles, you know, the SUV vehicles you see chilling around out there, and this year they're finally offering a hybrid version of that. Won't be available until September, but 1 out of these 5 cars will be that hybrid. We'll get it into our fleet and we'll test it out and see how it works for us. We just want to make sure that it can fit our equipment and it operates the way that we would need it to be. So beyond that, our building is well taken care of. Our range is up and running, so thank you for your support on that in the past. We're in the middle of our range training right now, and that's all being done on regular duty time because we don't have to reserve the range up on Ryan Road, and we shouldn't be getting any complaints about any of the noise out there. So that has been a huge perk for us to be able to do that inside. A lot of cost savings in overtime money. So our building also is repaired. All the water leaks, we believe, are repaired as best we can tell. We've certainly had rain to test that out lately, and we're not holding umbrellas in our basement right now. So it seems like everything is good on our building, so nothing on here related to our building. And that's just a quick overview of our FY20 budget.
Counselor Dwight?
Chief, given the fact that a lot of these conversations, of course, have been around all these departments, around personnel, one of the challenges that you faced for quite a while is retention, and trying to actually achieve the seniority as they move up the rank, so you don't have a 22-year-old captain. You want somebody who's actually put in the years and time for the department. That becomes harder and harder. What would you ascribe to the loss of retention?
Last year we lost 8 officers, so 4 of those officers who we lost actually went to other local municipal departments. So, and looking at those departments, there's definitely salary issues where they're just going other places, doing less work and making more money. So the standards that we have here in our community for our officers, as you know, as many of you likely know from the work you've done with us, is very high. We're an accredited agency, we're busy, we have a lot of calls, as I mentioned. So it's a busy and tough place to work at times. So if you can go somewhere else and make more money, you may opt to do that. You know, we certainly have a great building and equipment and all those things that we hope that people will enjoy the community here and enjoy what we have in the building as a community. But at the end of the day, money's a big deal. And some people are just leaving the field. I mean, people don't want to be police officers as much. Nationally, there's a lot of great stories out there. NPR just did a big national story, the New York Times, on just the policing shortage across the country. Just about 50% less applicants nationally than we had a few years ago, you know, only 5 years ago. And I know that myself. I mean, we used to have tests and we would have a couple thousand people line up, and now, you know, the application pool is definitely much smaller. So people just don't want to get into the field anymore. It's a field that is very public right now. People don't want to put this uniform on and have people think things about, you know, who they are. Or it's a difficult field in that way. So I think there's less people putting in, and then the people in are kind of questioning whether or not it's a good life choice for them. So it makes it all the more challenging for us to hire people, attract them, get them in the door, and then hold on to them.
And if I can follow up, of course, in addition, there's a significant cost to the city. I mean, we actually in some respect, I always feel that we're subsidizing training for other police departments, and including the state police departments. And I understand they were hiring a lot recently, for some reason, I can't remember.
They have some openings.
Yes, yeah. And as a result, I mean, I believe from what I've heard regionally that we're actually considered to be one of the superior police departments, and the quality of the officers and their training here fits nicely with lots of other departments. So to some extent, Northampton's subsidizing the education training of quality police officers that we can't retain, and I can appreciate your frustration in that, and noted that it is again regionally, in comparison for salary, not necessarily compensation packages. We offer different compensation packages in other departments, but clearly the salary and the possibility of doing less work, I could understand why that might lure other people away. There's also, as you've noted to me before, we have applicants who used to come, less so now, fortunately, because this is you've been focused on this, from farther away. The catchment area for applicants used to be much larger.
It did.
And had to have someone uproot themselves, move here to become part of this department, it becomes very alluring if their hometown department has a vacancy. And that's less a problem now because your concentration on promoting and seeking out much more localized applicants, obviously, that's an appeal, but.
We do try to do that, and we're always thrilled when we have local residents. We actually, on June 10th, we have a new academy going in. We have a recruit, soon-to-be recruit, who graduated from Northampton High School. So that's a rarity for us, and we're thrilled to be able to have that. So we hope that people who we hire locally will be more likely to stay in the community, and they already have a good understanding of the community when they come in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Branch?
Thank you. I think we don't have that many police officers, men or women, that live in Northampton.
We don't.
Right, because I had 3 on my ward, but I think I only have 1 now, one's retired. And a lot of them have gone to East Hampton or like Hadley or whatever. And I remember when Chief Sinkowitz, and I'll say it again, he always said, how it costs the city to bring an officer in, then you gotta put him through training, the cost. They stay for not very long, then they get jobs working for the state police, and that still is happening because the money is more and the benefits are more. We have a problem.
People do leave for other agencies. I think it's a tough comparison to state police just because that's a little bit of a different job, quite honestly. We lose a few people, but I think it's harder for me when we lose people to say Belchertown, Wilbraham, Greenfield, Agawam, where we just lost 4 officers to those 4
Why?
communities.
More money?
Well, probably, I mean, you know.
You gotta know why.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to them, and that's certainly what it looks like it is. So those are the ones that actually are tougher for me to swallow. People who want to go be a federal agent or be a trooper, it is a different type of job, so we understand that. But when we're losing people to our local municipal communities, that's a harder one. And as I said, some people are just getting out of the field and becoming something else. You know,
But it's still the cost of the city, bringing them in.
Yep, the
and
minimum
sending them
cost
for
is
training for how many months?
Yeah, the minimum cost is about $50,000 to train somebody, and then that ranges up to around $70,000 because we end up having their field training officer ends up having to work overtime to train them. So it becomes costly, certainly. But the additional cost, aside from money, is just the burnout. I mean, if you're going through a perpetual cycle of training new people, it's tiresome for the field training officers. It's an everyday, they evaluate people daily, grade them daily. It's an exhausting process. And as a supervisor, when you have a shift of, 13 people and 8 of them all have under a year on the job, that's stressful. Because you want to have that veteran support out on the street so that when your officers go out there that, you're confident that they're going to be great and meet the expectations of our community. And the job is hard. And as much as we may train someone for 6 months in an academy and 4 months in field training, they may go on a call their first day on that they've never had before because there's, calls are not always super consistent. So, yeah, it has a variety of negative impacts in the department to have high turnover.
I also want to thank you and your department and for working with me as a counselor and the police officer and Sarah Maiden, the principal, of working out that schedule of them using the range for shooting, which there was great concerns from many parents and everything worked out fine. And I want to thank you and your department for that. But I'm really happy now. It's down here in the police station. But thank you for everything that you do in the city and your policewoman and police officers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to follow up on a kind of broader conceptual personnel question, and I also have just some specific, I'm just curious about what particular line items are. But the personnel question that I wanted to ask about is, I understand that there has been an increase in calls to the department pretty consistently over the last several years. But I'm also kind of curious about the content of the calls, and you lay it out here in your report, and I really appreciate that. And I'm just kind of quizzical about, what percentage of the calls, do you kind of look at them critically and deem some of them calls that are maybe not totally appropriate for armed law enforcement to be responding to? And then my kind of follow-up piece to that around personnel is, I know, for instance, with the DART program, you're gaining more kind of experience and a track record of doing kind of multidisciplinary teams going out and responding to different kinds of calls. But I'm wondering, because there are models, sorry, I'm a little bit roundabout here. There are models from especially other countries where there are these multidisciplinary teams that go out, and they're not all armed law enforcement people for particular kinds of calls, whether they do domestic violence or drug overdose. And so that there's just potential there for figuring out kind of what size police force we need when we can be using multidisciplinary teams with different people trained in different professions to respond in different ways than an armed law enforcement officer would. So I'm kind of wondering if you've been thinking about those kinds of things and those kinds of models, and could they be applicable to Northampton?
Oh, it's a good question. I definitely have, I really like the co-responder models that involve like a mental health professional in with an officer or a mental health professional doing follow-up out in our community. So now, we have a civilian who does domestic violence follow-up, for instance, so they're on a grant, they come in at different days during the week, they read the log, and then they do follow up with people. So that's a type of service that's, a non-sworn person who's providing follow-up information, resources, referrals, that sort of thing. There's similar models that have mental health professionals who are nested in a police department that read through the log, and you have those high volume users, we're going to the same residents a lot, and is it appropriate for the police? Sometimes no, but there's no one else to do the job. And I mean, we get called on a lot of weird things that you don't necessarily need to send a police officer, but there's no one else to do this work. I would love it if there was just a large amount of social workers who are available in the middle of the night to respond out when someone's really in crisis. But so far, and we've had these discussions at meetings with different representation at the table, and there's just barely enough to even serve what we need now. If we have someone in a cell in the station and they're suicidal, it's really hard to get someone to come out and talk to them because everyone's overworked, understaffed. It's the same issues that you hear tonight on all these matters. It's just it's tough. So we do have a co-responder. You may not know this, but we have a volunteer mental health professional, social worker, who actually rides around with Nora Sullivan-Chin, one of our officers, and they do provide those follow-up services to people who, trying to see where they're at. If they're in crisis and they've been calling us a lot, kind of what's going on, can we connect them to services to try to reduce future calls from officers going to their homes and having us be there. Those aren't, I would love it if we had people to go on that, but we just don't. I mean, people have a lot of varying needs in our community. So Am I open to that model in the future, perhaps having more? Yes, I am, and it's something that I have on one of my many back burner projects that I want to look into more, but it costs money. We would have to pay a social worker to be on our, on this fiscal budget, and it's expensive. So, certainly necessary and important follow-up to do with people though.
I just wanted to ask about a few of the line items. I'm just curious, I just don't know what these terms are, and for some reason in past budget hearings, we haven't clarified, or maybe we haven't, I don't remember. Things like, they're all towards the end of the budget, working out of class, career incentives is a big chunk of change, it's $500,000. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that is. And then the stipends, there are 3 different stipend classes, crime scene service, detective stipends, first responder stipends. If you could just tell us a little bit about what each of those 5 things are.
Sure. So you asked about the working out of class. You asked me that, right? That is when we have, so the person who's in charge of a shift, the commander, is usually a lieutenant. So they make their regular salary while they're working, just whatever they're earning. If the lieutenant is off and a sergeant, who's a lower rank, has to work and serve as a commander of a shift, they get a very small increase in pay per hour to take on the additional responsibility as serving as the shift commander. So that's that one. You asked about the educational incentive, that bigger chunk that you said was about $500,000. That is you may have known it as the Quinn Bill at one time, our educational incentive program. So the Quinn Bill was not funded, by the state, their portion of it years ago, and we have negotiated a kind of new educational incentive program with flat rates. It used to be percentages for degrees, so now it's flat rates depending on what degree you have, and that's paid out twice a year out of a separate line.
So it's not career incentive, it's not incentives to hire people, it's actually for education of current sworn officers.
It pays, if you get hired and you have a bachelor's degree, you get money out of the educational line. You get more money. So it's an incentive to hire people, right? If they have a degree. And yeah, if they're existing working for us and they get an advanced degree, then they put themselves into an additional class, which should get them a higher stipend. Crime scene service you asked about. So we are fortunate enough to have our own crime scene services unit. So these are some of our own staff who are trained in processing crime scenes, and they get a stipend for that responsibility. There's increased hazards with that, blood, testifying in court, and increased responsibilities. So they have that on, and they're on call. So that's what that stipend is. The detective stipend, did you ask me that one?
I was asking about all the stipends, but also if you could just work into your response. I'm just curious how does it end up being less than an overtime payment to somebody? Because it sounds like if it's for particular duties, but not necessarily overtime.
It's not for overtime. It is for particular duties because you're on call for those duties. So if you have to have your phone on you 24 hours a day, you get a stipend for that, and then the increased responsibility that you carry with that. So our crime scene services are on call 24 hours a day, so they can have a phone with them all the time. Our other officers, when they're done with the day, they don't have to carry a phone around, and they're off. They're not responsible to answer their phone. So crime scene services and detectives are both, they fall into that category of being on call 24 hours a day and having those additional responsibilities and then getting those stipends. But it's unrelated to their overtime. So if they get called in, they earn overtime if they're on extra work. Did I answer all of your questions?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Coming over here. Bringing back over there, Councilor Labarge.
Thank you. So, Chief Casper, that Quinn Bill, that only covers police officers, that's it.
Yes, just sworn full-time police officers.
It's too bad they didn't have it for teachers. That would have been excellent. Especially when they're asking for bachelor's degree and stuff like that.
Councilor Murphy.
Although I might point out that the Quinn Bill came to us from the Commonwealth as a Commonwealth's great idea, and the Commonwealth stopped funding their great idea. So even if it had been for teachers, the state isn't funding it, so it would have been it'd be a nice idea for any municipal employee that advances their education, does more service to the city, that they got an incentive for that, but great state idea with no more state monies.
Councilor Nash.
Chief, Just for, it's not, so this question, not so much about what's going on here, but people concerned about the amount of money that the police department is spending on salaries for people down at Netta. Can you publicly state how much money we're actually spending down there?
Yeah, zero.
Thank you.
Yep, zero. We're spending zero. And I can actually tell you, our officers, they're out there almost 16 hours a day, depending on the day of the week. And they've actually encountered a lot of people who have been fleeing the scene or whatever else. I mean, they have been very busy down there catching people who have made poor choices and then decided to flee south. So the city's not paying them anything. It's completely paid by NETA. It's an outside detail. Every, when officers are out on details, they're being paid by, in most cases, that company that they're working for. So people can hire an officer to work a private detail, and that's what that is.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I repeat that a lot as well. So.
Yes, it's no problem.
But it's important to point out, there's still sworn officers to the city of Northampton, and that takes priority in the event that something, if they're even on extra detail duty, they're still eligible for a call.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're
Yep.
essentially their expanded police presence that's being subsidized by private agencies, and I think it was to the tune of $350,000 in the last quarter for NETA.
It was. I can't remember what date that was. There's been certainly more since then. I don't want to misrepresent, so it was 351
Right.
at one point.
But it's waning, which is worth noting as well.
Yeah,
we don't have lines of people waiting in snow and sleet and freezing rain, and volume is decreased. The numbers will also be subsequently decreasing, but the fact is, it's very important, as Councilor Nash said, because people suggesting the city is subsidizing at one point. In fact, actually, there's a significant benefit, as you point out. So, and it also, on one level, also offsets some of that pay despair that you described, that with at least opportunity funds like that might hold on to a few officers who might otherwise go to a community that doesn't have legal marijuana sales, perhaps. I don't know.
Anybody else? I know you say in your statement that there's not enough in the budget to meet the increasing demands for training, but can you talk a little bit about the training that Northampton police officers do that maybe other communities don't get?
I would describe this as well ahead of other communities, and with the budget that we do have, our officers are accustomed to changing their schedule in order to not cost the city more. So we're we have that as a bit of a luxury that we can do that, because occasionally we have someone on that are over the shift minimum, and then they can go and do that training work, so it doesn't cost the city any money. So we do around 500 to 600 hours of training every month for our officers. So that's a lot of training. Many departments, officers who may have worked at other departments, they talk about, I really want to go that training for so long, and we're able to send them to that and to get them the training. And it makes our department, very excellent, because we're kind of up on technology, kind of the cutting edge of best practices. And there's, the job of policing has changed quite a bit, as I talked about. I mean, 5-10 years ago, it was hard to get classes in mental health, and not only on mental health calls that we go on, de-escalation, all those things we've talked about, but the mental health of our staff, which really there's been a lot more focus on that. There's a lot of focus right now on officer suicide and PTSD and other stuff going on with our own staff. So we also send people for training on those sorts of things. In addition to that, they have their 40 hours a year of annual training that they're required to go to, and that's on topics that are determined by the state NPTC, which is our licensing agency, our overseeing agency. And they do that on, what's kind of going on that's the big topic. So this year, the topics were like active shooter, roadway safety operation around, we had new OSHA standards put in place that we're complying with. It costs us a bit of money to do that, but one of the things is just training officers on how to be safe around road details, something simple like that. But those are the sorts of trainings that we're doing, and it's a pretty robust package. If you want to learn more about it, you can go on our open data portal, and we list all the different types of trainings that we do, and you can see how many hours we commit to those different types of trainings.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions from the councilors? And I'm going to open it up to the public for any questions for Chief Casper. Please come forward.
So I'm Karen Foster, I live in Northampton. And something that came up, your question sort of addressed this, but you were talking, I just want to clarify, you're saying it costs $50,000 to $75,000 to train a new officer. And so I'm wanting to know how many new officers, kind of on average, we're looking at each year, and if the reason that it's not in the budget, if officers are leaving due to, if one factor is pay, if it ends up working out better in the budget to train new officers, or if that's to get through the fiscal year to balance the budget that way, is, I guess I'm sort of curious the reasoning behind the money and the training that's going into new officers rather than increased pay to match surrounding communities to retain the officers we have.
So, you know, I can't speak too much to the pay that they make right now. I mean, that's something that's negotiated, and we are where we are with salaries. And the cost that it is to train new people, I have no control over that either. You know, there's a tuition cost of the academy, there's the salary that we pay the person while they're at the academy, and then the salary that we pay them while they're in the 4-month field training program, and then the stipend that we pay the field training officer who's actually training the new officer. So that's plus all their new equipment. So that's the bulk of what those training costs are. And we had 4 who just came out of the academy. I'm just thinking you asked about how many we hired last year. We had 4 that just graduated from the academy, and we have 5 going in June. So that would put us, and we had 1 that we hired, worked 8 days, and then left. So that would put us at 10. And that's, you know, unfortunately, we would love to have that number down to just replacing people who are retiring, quite honestly. But we just haven't had that luxury. We have people leave, as I said, for a variety of reasons. And sometimes the job's just not a good fit. One of the things that we noticed is really different, and for the counselors who have participated in our hiring, you know, we see candidates now who don't have any experience. And normally we used to interview people who were part-time officers, who were security guards, or they did something in the field. Maybe they had a degree in criminal justice, who knows. Now we're interviewing great candidates, but they don't come in with that same kind of experience. So we don't know if they're going to love it. You know, once they get on the job and they're out doing it, they may have thought it was one thing, and here we've invested all this time and money into them. And like I said, great people, but they're like, you know what, this job isn't quite right for me. So unfortunately, we're getting more people who are, you know, newer to the field, and it's a little bit more of a gamble. So we expect to see people, maybe more loss in the academy and the field training phase when they're either in the academy and they're like, this is misery, I'm out. Or in field training when they're not able to meet the expectations and demands of our program. So we may see increases there. I'm curious to see that, you know, as we put more people through who don't come on with the kind of experience that we used to see. But we're definitely seeing new candidates. And some things about new candidates are great. You know, they have lots of different skills too, which is different from what we used to see.
Any other questions?
Just one other question. So that former Quinn bill, the career incentive, the education, what's that called? The career incentive, yep. That's actually something that is a negotiated item with the bargaining unit, correct?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So that's not something that we really have that much flexibility in terms of the previous question that we received, in terms of our ability to transfer, for example, money from that career incentive into salaries without that being a subject to bargaining.
Yeah, that would have to be negotiated, yes.
Any other questions for Chief Casper? No? Thank you very much, Chief, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good evening.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, that brings us up to Fire Chief Dwayne Nichols. Also our camera guy.
It's working well. I think it's doing all right. So technology isn't my forte, so thank you for Mr. Boyd to help me out with that.
Well, you're injured.
Yeah, well, I don't like to claim the injury, but just to give you some highlights from fire rescue for 19, we actually increased our call volume. Last year we crested 7,000 calls. We did roughly about 7,200 calls. That's up from 400 from FY18, or actually calendar year 18, or actually 17, I'm sorry, because I got my years straight here. So we continually see our call volume increase out there. The majority of that's because of EMS. That call volume continues to increase out there. Basically, it's about a 70-30 split. 70% of our calls are EMS, 30% are fire, and those continue to increase as we go. We completed our renovations of our ladder truck. We refurbished that. basically about $60,000. We sent it to Florida to basically have a new electrical system put into it, and we've got it back, we've got it operating, and we've had no problems with it. So it was a fantastic fix, which ultimately to replace that truck would be about $1.4 million. So I think we've added about 20 years to that vehicle, and it's been a great thing for us to get that repaired. We also purchased turnout gear for our firefighters last year, so every member of the department, sworn member, got a new set of turnout gear. One of the things in the fire service that has been a big initiative is cancer and cancer awareness, and we're able to right now be able to provide 2 sets of turnout gear. So we're on a 5-year cycle, so basically they say through the national standard a set of turnout gear is good for 10 years. So if we do it on a 5-year average, they'll have a backup set, so they'll have a fire, they'll take their gear out of service, they have gear to wear to the next call, to the next fire, we get it cleaned, we get it back in service, and we're ready to go. And that's been very good, very positive in the department. They're very thankful that we've taken that on to kind of prevent and help look at just health and wellness within the department itself. Some of the energy management stuff we did at headquarters through central services, just to say kudos to Dave Pomerantz, really has helped increase the building. It's air conditioning and heating. We used to have very cold rooms, very hot rooms, and it would kind of sporadic throughout the building. But the energy upgrades we did last year really have taken away that. This winter was, I didn't hear any complaints about the heat or cooling that we're going to have out through there. So that's been very good for what we've done for upgrades to the building. For my budget, it's really not exciting. It's a slight increase, basically. Total PS and OM, it went up $207,000. One of the things we were able to do early on in the year is we were able, with the 2 collective bargaining units, sell contracts for the next 3 years. So this budget reflects the contractual raises that are put into that. So I appreciate the guys working with me, and the mayor and Susan Wright, and getting that accomplished and taken care of out through there. Other than that, the slight increases in some OM, and I mean slight, is basically we increased our third-party billing, which is the company that does our EMS billing. They're very successful. Right now, we're collecting about 96% of our calls that we're taking in. So we're able to collect 96% of the revenue that for every call. That's really good from what they're telling us. A lot of communities are probably low 80s, maybe 90%. We're doing really good on that aspect of it. And the other thing was just some laundry services. We increased it like $500 just to cover taking care of the linen and stuff that we need to take care of. Everything else was on the personnel side for increases, and it was really contractual bargaining that drove that.
Councilman Labarge.
Thank you. I see you probably filled it already, vacancy on dispatch?
For dispatch, I don't have any dispatchers. We got 3 vacancies on the bottom of my budget. Those are all filled. So actually, I'd say I was full staff, but I just had a member come in the other day who actually took early retirement. So I'm throwing down 1 spot. So those 3 vacancies that are reflected in the budget have been filled. I do have personnel to cover that. I'm very fortunate. I know the police department and Chief Casper always struggles with retention. The last 3 years, the only people I've seen leave is due to retirements. And we've been very successful in the hiring process of getting people on board and bringing them on quickly and getting them trained up and getting them on shift. And they're staying. So that's a very positive thing for us in the fire department.
Thank you. And thank you with your department, which all do an excellent job.
Thank you.
You make many trips up West Stanton Road.
They're busy.
Yes, they are.
We staff basically 3 ambulances 24/7, and we're averaging 21 calls a day, and that's average. So I mean, sometimes they're above that. These guys are busy up there.
They are.
And 50% of the time we have 2 or more calls going on in the city, which for a fire department is kind of unheard of. But we are a busy service out there.
Thank you.
Dwayne, and we talk about this every year, but it's worth noting each time is that, as I know that you recently had a structural fire, but they're the rarity, they're the exception. Structural fires, as once upon a time, they were far more commonplace.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago we didn't do ambulance service, or it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, you're right.
And now that it constitutes about 70% of your call response, and the department is now more aptly named fire rescue, is that trend continuing? Do you see, as you said, you noting a trend in call responses? Are those increases in fire calls, or are they like transport calls or emergency responses with the EMTs?
It's mostly emergency calls for EMS. We don't do non-emergency calls. If people see Pioneer Valley Ambulance, they kind of cover the
Right, they're
non-emergency
doing the
calls.
transport or something.
But the call increase is basically due to just emergency calls. I think it's, people being more aware and having more access to just the medical field and the knowing the need that they may need to seek, medical treatment, and the willingness to call and ask for help. One of our challenges, I think, going forward is, as you spoke about fires, is, getting our people trained up. When I came in 32 years ago, you're right, we had some pretty big fires out there. We're not having those fires, big fires, and that's positive, that's a great thing, and that's nationally in the fire service, we're seeing that. But it's just getting people trained and ready to go so that when you have that large fire, they're able to take command, go in and extinguish it and be ready to go. So we do a lot of fire training, even though we don't have a lot of true structure fires out there. I mean, thank God, due to early detection and sprinkler systems and all that, we catch them in the early stages of fire, so they don't grow and they don't grow as big. I know we had one up on Birds Pit Road a week ago or so, and that was contractors with rags. It was an accidental fire, but it was during the daytime. It got noticed quick, and it was extinguished. But our biggest drive, I think, is EMS on the call volume and the increase with that.
And so you anticipate that trend to more or less continue?
I believe it's going to continue. We have a lot of service agencies in town, and believe it or not, that's really putting kind of a demand on our service. As Chief Casper spoke about with people in crisis and stuff, not only a police officer goes, but a lot of times an ambulance goes with them. We may need to bring it to CDH or another area, mental health facility, just because, they need to seek treatment out, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, because I've been here 14 years, and I can remember way back when, overtime was all an issue, injured on duty was an issue, the morale of the department was an issue. We instituted EMS, and in the time I've been here, the department has become very stable. You've integrated EMS very successfully and profitably. We train people up. We don't have the overtime. The staffing has worked out so that we don't have the overtime expenses we used to have when people were out. I don't think you have the injured on duties you used to have before. Everything has really turned around very nicely in the time that I've been here, and I'd like to congratulate you and your department for that.
Thank you.
It shows up in the stability of the budget and the services across the board. The citizens are getting a better service. It's more predictable financially, and I think your people are happier your retention's good, as you say. You lose people because they retire now, not because they burn out or they get injured or they get a better deal somewhere. They're happy working here, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I have to say thank you to Mayor Narkowitz. He's been a big supporter of the department and in collective bargaining and some of the incentives out there, and just the support to train and work with it. Labor relations, I'm glad you noted that. Labor relations, in my opinion, are probably as highest I've ever seen them. And that goes kudos to the guys working in the department. I appreciate, the firefighters, the officers, their input, and we work collaboratively together and are really trying to make a good service out there. I tell them every day what they do is extraordinary, because it truly is amazing what some of the stuff they're doing, and we really appreciate it. And they provide a great service to the community. So I thank you for the credit, but there's many people that deserve it. Thank you also.
I know this isn't really a budget question, but we have so few opportunities to actually talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the firefighters that you have on staff, and there are only about 3 or 4 women at this point, and I'm just wondering, is that common across the Commonwealth?
Actually, I have 7 women on the
7,
department.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And are there kind of concerted efforts to recruit more women? How does that look, just the gender?
I think we're probably on the high end with other local departments as far as having that male-female ratio. But EMS is a big draw, believe it or not, that once we got into EMS, a lot of females are into that field, and we've drawn them that way. So that's really been a big input from it. And we're very lucky. We've had some very good candidates come forward, and they're working out excellent in the department, and I would go into any fire with any one of them.
Councilor Nash?
Chief, I'm interested in hearing a little more about, it was a ladder truck?
Yes.
Yeah, and you spoke to us about that at City Services a while back, and I think it was about to take its trip down to Florida to get the repairs.
Yeah.
How old is that truck?
It's a 2004
And
100-foot ladder.
so it's, what, 15 years old now, or 12 years?
Yeah.
Don't make me do math right now.
I won't do math.
I'm working
I don't
on a
wanna put you on the
budget.
spot.
And you think we'll be able to use that truck for another 20 years now?
I believe we've added about 20 years to it. It's not a frontline piece. We run it as what we call a secondary piece. So within the city, every day we have 3 ambulances staffed and 2 engines. That's all the time, 24/7. So when we get a structure fire, what we'll usually do is we'll drop an ambulance crew to take the ladder. So only when we have those real true emergency calls does that ladder roll out the door. So it's not seeing a lot of road miles that it typically used to years ago when we used to roll it with an engine company. So it's not seeing the wear and tear that we normally would. And just the upgrade, we upgraded the electrical system to a newer version, and that's really fixed all the problems that we've had with it. Because I know in the past years, we've really struggled with trying to keep it in service. And I can say that in the last 6 months, it really hasn't been out of service. It's been out of service for some mechanical issues, but nothing electrical. But with that and just the way we're running it this time, it shouldn't need to be replaced out of that because it's really a support vehicle for us.
Great, thank you.
It's a quick question, and it may actually be for Susan Wright or the mayor, because I wanted to compare across 2 departments. I see that you have an educational incentives line item for $172,000, which is less than half of what we saw in the budget, the police budget, and this is probably a collective bargaining piece. But I'm just wondering, because it's a similar size staff, why it would be more than double for a different department, that same kind of educational incentive.
The chief you can answer that.
I believe the police department is, and the mayor, if I say wrong, the police department is looking for a degree when they hire people. We don't necessarily look for a degree. It's certainly an incentive for us to look at someone who has it, but we don't make it a requirement that they have it. So that's why we don't have that big a number for the career incentives out there.
They have less people with bachelors and masters.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Chief. When you talk about the most of the increase in calls on the EMS side, how much of that is opioid related, and what are your people seeing out there on the front lines?
I mean, we're seeing the same as the police department, but we track it a little different. In our reporting systems, an overdose can be prescription drugs, can be alcohol. So our numbers are going to look higher than the police department's, who solely tracks the opiate. But it is a concern. We do see it when some bad stuff comes into the city. We know it pretty quick. And so it is a drop. It is a concern, and it is a crisis out there that we keep an eye on and work closely with the police department and the agencies out there. There truly is a network that when something happens, phone calls are made and people are aware, which is pretty cool when you think about it, to try to get the word out and notify people.
Is there a reason you don't track it in the same way as the police department, or break it out in the
We have to report to the state in a certain format, and they don't break out opiates for that, and it's as simple as that. So when we do basically our numbers for the state, they just want to see total overdoses, and they've never wanted to break out that opiate. I mean, we could, but I actually rely on the police department's records to pull that up and out. We can find it if we search for it, but we have to report to the state in a certain manner, and that's why we don't track it solely as opiates.
Any other questions from the council? No? Then I'm going to open it up to the public for any questions for the chief. Nobody? Councilor Carney, did you have any other questions?
No, thanks.
All right, if there are no other questions for Chief Nichols, we're going to wish him good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. last but definitely not least, and I know there are people who have been very patiently waiting for Director Pomeranz to talk about this.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you, Mayor. Let me start with some general comments on both Central Services budget and the Parking Maintenance Division budget. And if so desired, I could certainly also talk about the slew of 16 or so capital projects that we're overseeing and doing this summer and give you an overview of those if you'd like. Let me start with Central Services. And before I start, let me just also give Chief Nichols a pat on the back. I served on Amherst Fire for 20 years, and Amherst Fire is a great department, and as is Northampton. And Northampton is definitely looked up to across the Northeast as a well-run, highly efficient, well-funded department that provides exceptional services. And I also have the opportunity on an ongoing basis to work with Chief Nichols and his staff on numerous capital projects for the fire department. So let me just, for his good shoulder, let me give Dwayne a pat on the back.
Thank you for the level of feedback.
So let's talk about Central Services budget for a minute. So the difference between fiscal 19 and fiscal 20 is a 5.6% increase, approximately $91,000, which is mostly in the PS area. Contract negotiations, COLAs, et cetera. The other reason we have a small increase this year is that we added a full-time custodian to provide custodial services to the DPW facilities. Director Lascalia was using several private firms to provide services to some of her facilities. We moved that in-house. It's what we do at Central Services, and we're reaping the benefits because we have an inside person now, as well as purchasing our custodial supplies, much less than what we were looking at, what Donna was looking at for the outside firms that she was using. So that's also part of why the PS is up a little bit this year, because we added a young man who basically goes between 4 different facilities over a 5-day week, and everybody loves him. He's doing a great job. Just as a reminder, if you look at your budget sheets that Susan did, we continue to split the cost for the mail courier, the HVAC tech, the city electrician, and the facilities project coordinator in my office between Smith Folk, NPS, the DPW, and then city funding, depending on the percentages are based on the detail and the percentage of overall, not a 40-hour week, but they're providing for those different entities. That process has been in effect for some time and continues to work well. A couple of points on operations and maintenance. We have both natural gas and electricity contracts that are expiring this fall. We'll be going out this summer for new contracts. We'll be finishing 2-year contracts for both electricity and natural gas. We are budgeting for fiscal 20 for both natural gas and electricity based on estimated increases in distribution costs, but a decrease in supply costs. The firm we're working with is indicating that that's where we're going to be headed. Normally I like to do at least a 2-year, if not a 3-year contract. We've been doing 2-year contracts. It makes it easier for budget cycles to at least have 2 years worth of time frame for utility contracts. A couple of notes on electricity. We converted 2,100 city streetlights to LEDs in fiscal year 17. It took us an inordinate amount of time to get a rate tariff from National Grid to do that, and it took us an inordinate amount of time to get the new tariff installed by National Grid, so our rates would be shown accordingly for LEDs versus the old incandescents and the high-pressure sodiums. That has all been resolved. We finally have the rebates and incentives back from National Grid,
And we are showing significant decreases for streetlights in this year's budget. The other thing I'll note is the solar array at the capped landfill that Amoresco did for us. We are generating a large amount of net metering credits, and those are being applied to reduce energy costs across the board for various facilities and our electricity line. So the array is not only generating electricity, but it's generating revenue for us as well. So if you look at your budget numbers, you'll see decreases or small decreases or very small increases in the electricity. Chris Mason monitors the net metering credits on an ongoing basis, and then plus you distribute those as Amoresco generates them and returns them to the city. Under repair and maintenance for buildings, you're going to see a jump between fiscal 19 and 20. Susan and I discussed this. We are doing more and more construction and renovation projects in-house. It saves us on prevailing wage, it saves us on bidding, and we are, as opposed to playing catch-up and moving money around, when we drain one category, Susan and I decided we would increase the repair and maintenance buildings category or line for fiscal 20. We also are doing a lot more pre-capital funding architectural and engineering work, which I'm funding out of my architectural and engineering line based on the capital cycle and the fact that school's out in June, we need to be ready to go with projects. We're doing engineering and architectural services, let's say January and February, using architectural and engineering services out of the budget because we haven't received that capital funding yet to cover that work. And it's been working fine. A couple of notes on trash. Same cost for fiscal 20 as fiscal 19, as it has been for the previous 5 years before that. As most of you know, Pat Kennedy sold alternative recycling, decided to play golf, and they were taken over by USA Waste and Recycling. A little bit of a bumpy start here and there with them, but we've ironed things out. They're also still providing dumpster and compactor services under a multi-year lease for the parking lots. That's a separate contract that will be up for renewal in fiscal 20, the end of fiscal 20. USA Waste has agreed to hold their prices for a 1-year extension on the trash contract. So we'll be bidding that a year from now, actually a year from March, this past March. And that covers all the school buildings, the libraries, and city buildings. But they are going to hold their pricing for 1 more year. And I told them we're going to be bidding it. So get ready, but we're getting the same level of service, same price for fiscal 20. And then just a reminder that the centralized bulk purchasing programs that we've done for years for office supplies, both the city and the schools, the photocopying program and the custodial supplies continues. We've added Forbes Library in the mix for some of these, as well as adding Forbes for some of the code-related inspection programs we need to do. And we save a fair amount of money by doing the bulk purchasing across the board. And then just a note, I mentioned the streetlights and electricity. Chris Mason hard at work with Green Communities applications for the next round, which is all focused on exterior lighting retrofits for LED projects. We're going through that right now and we're requesting more money. We're also looking at, actually we're moving along with the microgrid development at Maine Fire Headquarters for emergency operations. We're looking at expanding the parking lot. Chief Nichols has a demand for more parking spaces and better maneuverability for the apparatus. And we're looking at doing a microgrid and a solar array at Maine Fire on Carlin Drive. We have grant money for some of that, and we have capital money for the rest of it, and then we'll be going out to bid for a solar developer to put the solar array on the parking lot. So all of that is proceeding. That's, excuse me, that's pretty much a couple of comments on central services. Let me just talk briefly about parking. Minimal 2.8% increase, mostly due to PS. For fiscal year '20, no changes in staffing levels, and the 5 members of the parking maintenance staff continue to maintain both the 2 garages and the 7 parking lots, as well as meters, and the green machines, multi-space stations. We'll be bidding natural gas and electricity, obviously for the parking division, the garages. When we bid for the rest of the city and the schools. You'll notice the line for trash removal, just a reminder, that's the annual Pedal People contract. They, as you know, 12 months a year, they're out there biking up Elm Street in February with chains on their bikes. God bless them. But that's the Pedal People contract. And then where it says telephone code red, just a reminder, that's pretty much an annual fixed cost for the citywide emergency notification system that Kelly runs out of dispatch. We cover that with parking revenue, parking money, capital money, I'm sorry, budget money from the parking maintenance budget. And then just a couple of notes, the bottom of your budget for parking where it says OOM, that is ordinary or out of ordinary specialized maintenance. You'll see the 3 categories there, and just a refresher, site improvements, we use that money for painting work in the garages, crack sealing of asphalt, really miscellaneous needs that come up over time. The equipment parking, you're seeing an increase there. That is the parking on multi-space green machines. We're up to 31 machines right now, scattered around the downtown and the parking lots. And that line covers maintenance and supplies as well as the monthly data costs we have to incur for people being able to use their credit cards when they purchase at the green machines. So that's why, and we're adding more machines. We have 2 machines we're going to be moving from the Union Station lot shortly, and then we have capital approval for 4 additional machines. So we're going to be removing additional meters as we work around Upper Main Street. And then the last item under OOM, garage parking equipment. That's more computers, security camera upgrades, and then the gate system, the ITS revenue system, supplies and maintenance as we need it for that system. So that's what's called OOM. That's really it. Be happy to open it up for questions.
Plenty. Do a lot. Councilor LaBarge.
Thank you. Ryan Road School, I want to thank you, I want to thank the mayor. Such great improvements into the cafeteria area, with the new flooring on that, cameras. We haven't heard of any more breaking and entering, which is great. And just everything that you're doing throughout the city. I have a question about the solar array at the Glendale landfill. How much actually, because this is strictly, we're using that for the city, our city buildings, correct?
Correct.
So how much have we actually saved by having that?
I'm going to get you that information from Chris, Counselor.
I would
and
appreciate that.
I will
Because
get
I
that
think
to
that's
you. I'll get it to all
really
members of the
critical
council.
to know, because that was the reasons why we worked very hard, the mayor and I, and residents, to have that place there, because it would generate a savings for the city.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll get that to you.
Councilor Dwight?
The National Grid's, what do we call it, reluctance, actually, relative to tariffs, I would presume had an adverse impact on the payback on the LED installs. Is that, or do they compensate us for in any way for their foot dragging?
No. No, it really didn't affect the payback because the meter started, no pun, when we actually did the 2100 light conversions. We were budgeting, expecting that it was going to start in fiscal 16 or 17, 16, and we didn't do the project till fiscal 17. So that the delay affected budgets. As far as compensation, we have received some funding from them. They had to tweak a lot of bills to show the new rate, and there were credits. And I would sort of compare it to dealing with them, comparing it to sort of trying to herd Jello on a foggy night. It was not totally successful, Bill.
Right.
But we were able through persistence to at least get a percentage of the credits that were promised.
You know, because, I mean, this went to, we were expecting actually a pretty quick payback on this equipment, and start to realize genuine savings over time.
Right.
And so the depreciation period was, was extended by 2 years before we could actually start to realize those the benefits that of installing LEDs with not to mention a 50% decrease, I think, in ambient light shed, a significant decrease in energy costs.
Yeah.
But okay, all right. Well, that's National Grid, not you. And thanks for Jello wrestling.
The other thing I'll just note about the streetlight project, we used to pay on an annual basis National Grid $65,000 a year for them to sort of be on call as our maintenance provider for streetlight repairs. Yeah. And we had to purchase arms and lights and fuses that they would then install at night. We used to see them roaming around the city. We would put work orders in. When we did the streetlight conversion, we contracted with Siemens, who did the conversion project for us for a year, just to get an idea of what the maintenance scope would be and what the costs would be. I then went out with an RFP for a local maintenance program, which is showing up in this year's budget. We covered it under operations and maintenance last year. Now it's built into the streetlight line item. And we're dealing with a local contractor from Belchertown. A lot less money and a lot faster response to work orders or a pole gets hit. So it's been a real win-win. But just to show you the gradation of National Grid, what they charged us, what Siemens was charging us, and now what we're paying for this multi-year contract with the local contractor. So a continued big savings.
Thank you.
So Kearney.
Thank you. Thank you for that report. I just have one other question, and maybe it's not for you, but maybe for Susan and the mayor. So, it's only because I was following up on the question I had for Director Lascalia about the city electrician, because I do understand, and you make it clear in the central services, that the city electrician is paid public schools 33%, DPW 40%, so I'm assuming the remaining 27% comes out of the central services budget.
Correct.
But on your line here, you have the full amount as one FTE, as a 40-hour, one FTE. And so, I know it's also listed, I didn't look for the lines in the school budget, but I know that in the DPW budget, those 20% are each listed under the respective water and then sewer enterprise funds. So, is that maybe just a mistake or a typo?
He's listed as an full-time FTE in central. He's listed as a full-time FTE in central services, and if you look at the enterprise funds budgets, there's no FTE listed for him.
Right, but there's a dollar amount.
Right. But when you're looking at the central services budget, what's really counting there is what's in the column that says general fund. And
okay, so that FTE figure that's there
the FTE
is not
figure,
something,
it goes with the column that says FY2020 budget.
Yes.
So he earns, let's see, where is he?
69,336.
Electrician, here he is, yeah. So he earns 69,336 total, but the central services budget only pays 18,721
Oh,
in
okay.
salary.
I was just confused because I didn't know if this
Yeah, because when I do the FTE count, which is in the FTE chart,
Yep.
I don't want to double count him.
Right,
So-
right. And that's what I was afraid of, because I just saw this whole line of this. So we're not actually looking at this total, this 1,044,000. Oh, it isn't. So how could it be the same number?
So, so
yeah.
the way that all of the budgets in here are structured is the column that says FY 2020 budget is what is actually coming out of the budget. What is the budget? And then if you look on the 3 columns to the right that says funding sources, it either says it's the general fund, other, and then it lists the source.
Okay, okay, I
So-
think, I see that. I just wanted to, and that
Right.
makes complete sense to me. I do know that he works half-time for the schools.
Right, but we put him 1 FTE under central services because ultimately David is his supervisor.
Right,
So
right.
even though he works in those departments, he reports to Dave.
Okay, that helps to clarify for other things that are broken up that way. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Councilor Bidwell.
Thank you. Back to the LED streetlight project.
Sure.
I know there's a lot that goes into it, but ballpark, can you estimate either on a percentage or a dollar basis what the utility savings are on a net basis over what we were paying before?
Again, same response to Councilor Labarge. Chris is monitoring this on a weekly basis. So I'm going to ask him to generate those since we completed the project at the end of fiscal 17, and I will get that to everybody as part of the energy monitoring, data monitoring that he does.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about electric vehicles. What percentage of our fleet under central services is electric? And because I know from the Mass Municipal Conference that there are pretty serious incentives and all kinds of programs that the state is doing to incentivize the purchase by municipalities of electric vehicles.
Right.
And I also just wanted to ask a question about charging stations around the city, if there is a plan to install more charging stations and incentivize residents' use of electric vehicles.
So let me talk about electric vehicles first, and then we can talk about charging stations. So central services at this point does not have any electric vehicles. We use basically fuel efficient, meets green community standards, Subaru, either Foresters or Outbacks. There used to be the program where the police department would hand down the old Crown Vics. You can't do that anymore and be a member of green communities. So nobody's really using Crown Vics anymore. The building department's using Subarus, the health department's using Subarus. We haven't started to do capital planning for electric vehicles to replace the Subarus because of their age. They're still too new. But we will certainly be doing that when the time comes to build them into the capital schedule. Fire has, I think, 1 or 2 electric vehicles that they're using for inspections and short-term, going to Springfield for training, things like that. As far as charging stations, we put the AERO chargers in a number of years ago with a state grant. They were sort of the first generation of chargers, and we have 6 of them scattered around the city. Some of them have aged. We've had to replace several of them due to damage or aging. We're looking at, with the renovation work of the Roundhouse parking lot, of putting 2 additional charging stations down there, as well as maintaining the ones that we already have. So it's definitely on our radar to do. And again, Chris works with green communities and the state programs, and he talks with departments who may be purchasing vehicles. There aren't a lot of departments besides central services, PD, and fire, and building, who have any sort of I don't want to say a sizable fleet, but more than several vehicles. The problem for us also is that the technicians, the electrician, the HVAC tech, electric vehicles for vans, which they need to haul their materials around or equipment, they're just not there yet. But I would like to think down the road that we'd be looking at that because everybody's just running short mileage around the city on a daily basis.
So the parking officers do use electric vehicles,
Yes.
correct?
Nissan Leafs.
So I know that this is a capital budget question, but I was hoping that you would tell us if we have several, and I wanted to ask you about the savings and how that kind of plays out, but as you're explaining, we don't yet, we're not yet there.
Right, the two Leafs that we have were purchased in 2015 that the PEOs are using. And, the vehicles run well, minimal to no maintenance, so just general maintenance.
Are they using the 6 chargers, or are there chargers dedicated for
No, they
these
park in the
vehicles?
garage, do a quick charge, or they're there at night, charging when, the rest of the public is not in the garage using the chargers.
Any other, Councilor Labarge?
Yes, with the Commission on Disabilities, we had a meeting in regards to, there was great concerns of people with disabilities and wheelchairs. And after that meeting, we had another meeting with the Rotary Club, and one of the members said that of great concerns of wheelchairs with the batteries in it, that how come we couldn't have it available on Main Street for people to go ahead and charge their battery in their wheelchair. So I had talked to Wayne about it, and there is great concerns from people who are in wheelchairs. If somehow we could have electric outlets, maybe over by Pulaski Park, down by Spolitos in that area, because we do have several people in wheelchairs there. So I don't know what the cost would be, or if there's any grants or anything, but it would be something I think the city really needs to look at.
All right, thank you. I'll talk with Chris and Wayne and see if there might be something we can pursue.
Anything else from the councilors? I know there are people who've been waiting a long time to ask you a question or make a comment. So, please.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I hope you learned something about the rest of the budget though.
Yeah. Well, I'm Mark Campbell, and I'm one of the founding members of the North Lincoln High Speed Community Network Coalition. Back in February, you approved Mayor Narcowitz's capital plan, which included funding for the next 2 fiscal years to do a study of the municipal network for North Lincoln. It's our understanding that funding the first phase of the study is part of the FY2020 budget that you're considering today and tomorrow. We urge you to approve this budget with this funding. And once approved, we hope that the mayor will begin the study promptly. Our city's demographics are projecting a rapidly aging population. To maintain this level of services, Northampton is going to have to attract entrepreneurs and businesses. By lowering the costs of doing business online in Northampton Municipal Network will be a key step toward accomplishing that goal, to bring back the revenue and the younger people that we're going to need in the future. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Sorry you waited so long to tell us that. Anybody else have anything to comment on about central services?
Alex Derek, Florence. I think the lighting, the LED lighting is excellent, and very pleased with the savings in that. I hear from a number of people about the color temperature of the lights, and that that having excessive exposure to blue light is a health concern. And I wondered if the department has, for the newer lights, I mean, I understand it would probably be too much to replace the existing lights we have, but for the newer lights, what would be the increased costs to have a more warmer color temperature for any new LED lights going in? Has that been researched?
So the capital money, capital projects that we're looking at doing, and the Green Communities program that we're applying for money for, is going to be looking at what I would call the state of the art for LEDs. When we did the street lights in 2016 and 17, we did extensive research on color, warmth, visibility. We coordinated with the police department as far as intersections that we felt needed brighter lighting. The technology is changing so quickly that Chris Mason in my office, in the subsequent projects we're doing, is looking at a whole new array of spectrum lighting that can be installed. So that all is being taken into consideration. As far as the savings, I think that's the same question as Councilor Bidwell asked, which I'm going to ask Chris to put something together that'll be available on what we've saved since the LED project was completed.
Can I add to that? And somewhat actually, in the original bidding process, actually, when we were going, David's absolutely right. There was a lot of scrutiny paid to optimal color temperature, and we went as warm as we could given the grants that were available. There were grant restrictions on types of bulbs that we could purchase, and we got the warmest that was allowed under the current grant status. And now circumstances have changed, but the fact is, part of the problem, of course, is these bulbs' durability, I suppose, in some respect. So, but with the program that David's talking about, that Chris Mason doing with external building lighting, other lighting systems that didn't come under the auspices of the street lighting system, we now have the opportunity to actually go with warmer bulbs. But the fact that my concern was that part of the discussion was basically suggesting that we intentionally went with colder, bluer lights because we just felt that was poppycock, the whole issue about warmth. We didn't. That's not true. We did the very best we could to allow for the purchase of these systems, and at the same time, as I said, reduced 50% of the ambient light that was present with the sodium bulbs, and also, I mean, get close to 70% reduction in consumption. And so all those things, the fact that we knew going in that the technology would change. The problem was a question of when. It's like with a cell phone. When do you decide to buy a cell phone? Do you wait for the 12th generation, the 15th generation? There has to come a point in which we had to make a decision because we're lagging behind a number of other communities who are benefiting from those conversions. So that's just more the context of the conversation that went forward on that.
I'm just going to add too that the bulbs we did purchase were certified by the International Dark Sky Association, and they were also met the standards of the American Medical Association, which had published a big study about light. So it met all those certifications by an international agency of astronomers who don't like any ambient light. So anyway, again, just to add to that, these were like the best that were available to us at the time.
Anyone else?
I wrote an editorial about it.
Anyone else on lights or anything else? No? Thank you for covering us very much.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Good night. Good night.
Okay. Does anyone have any new business? Actually, we're not going to close the hearing. We're going to.
We'll continue to tomorrow evening. Set the regular council meeting.
All those in favor of continuing the public hearing to the council meeting tomorrow at 7, please say aye.
Aye.
No objections? Abstentions? All right. Thank you. We are continued.